Hello, and thank you for joining our Pollinator Pursuit training for the 2024 season. My name is Amanda Barth, and I am the Rare Insect Conservation Coordinator for Utah State University and the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. I wish I could be with you in person for this training, but alas, I'm off chasing rare tiger beetles this week. This presentation is a training resource for our amazing Utah Pollinator Pursuit volunteers. And many of you have been contributing to this evolving community science project for almost 6 years. Each year, we learn new and incredibly valuable information from our volunteer contributed pollinator observations. And with these statewide data, we have made genuine progress in developing conservation actions for at-risk pollinators. I'm going to share some updates we've made to our target species and data collection methods. But first, I want to share a little background. Utah's diverse landscape boasts an exceptional diversity of thousands of pollinating insect species. Bees, beetles, flies, moths, butterflies, and wasps are valuable pollinators for our natural ecosystem and agricultural lands. Utah is home to more than 1,000 species of native bees, hundreds of butterfly and moth species, hundreds of wasps and flies, and an unknown number of yet to be described species. The healthiest ecosystems are often the most diverse. Healthy functioning ecosystems offer diverse habitat that supports many types of pollinators and other wildlife. So if you see many types of bees, butterflies, and other insects, you can get a sense of environmental health. Unfortunately, many important insect pollinators are seeing significant and worrying declines. Some of the biggest threats they face are from land use practices that involve heavy pesticide use, intensive farming, and urban development that eliminates vital habitat for foraging, breeding, and overwintering. Warming temperatures, shifting weather patterns, drought, storms, and heavy fire seasons are just some of the consequences of climate change that also threaten pollinator diversity and abundance. When we see a sharp loss in pollinators, this is a big red flag that our environmental health is also in serious decline. But without knowing what species we have or monitoring their populations, we risk losing these important animals before we can even act to protect them. Utah is one of many states that does not have policy addressing pollinator health, but many pollinating species already face extinction risk, and addressing these data gaps is essential to prevent losing them. There are many butterfly species facing serious declines across the western region and in Utah, including several that have been listed or petitioned for listing under the Endangered Species Act. In February 2024, Utah saw its first listed insect species, the Nokomis silver spot butterfly, an isolated subspecies of Nokomis fritillaries found only in a small area of southeastern Utah, as well as Colorado and New Mexico. I'm sure you're all familiar with the monarch butterfly, which is facing an upcoming listing decision by the end of this year. Thankfully, we are in a much better shape with the monarch data thanks to 5 years of dedicated Utah Pollinator Pursuit volunteers. We have a much better understanding of the distribution of monarch breeding habitats statewide and how important those areas are for the western monarch population. This community science data is helping us develop targeted restoration, land management practices, species distribution models, and projects to monitor migration behavior across the western region. The large marble was petitioned last year for listing, and several other species have exhibited worrying declines that have experts concerned about their risk of extinction. They face a variety of threats, including loss of the host plants their caterpillars depend on, exposure to pesticides, and loss of quality habitat. We have a growing list of vulnerable butterflies and very few records that would inform their meaningful conservation. Utah claims more than 1,000 species of native bees, including at least 20 bumblebee species. Research shows persistent declines of many native bees across their ranges, driven by habitat loss, climate change, and pesticide use. Data gaps in species occurrences and distribution across varying habitats continues to limit our ability to develop conservation strategies. Thanks to contributions from UPP volunteers since 2020, we have greatly expanded our understanding of three petitioned species in Utah: the western bumblebee, the Morrison's bumblebee, and the American and Sonoran bumblebee. This is the same species. In fact, UPP data collection has improved our knowledge of 17 bumblebee species across the state, including several other potentially vulnerable species like the indiscriminate cuckoo bumblebee. This really demonstrates the power of community science. We're hoping to wield that power to look for the Mojave poppy bee, a very tiny fairy bee that specializes on bear poppies in the Mojave Desert and might even be extinct from Utah. This bee is also being considered for federal listing. As the saying goes, the more we learn about our at-risk insect pollinators, the more we realize we don't know. Most of our native insect species have few records, if any, outdated descriptions, and nearly no information on which threats pose an issue. This year, we're asking our volunteers to keep an eye out for whole groups of pollinators with limited occurrence information. Solitary bees that are often very small, rare, or specialists on certain plant species, or even specialists on certain host bees as kleptoparasites or social parasites, can be very rare, including digger bees, wool carder bees, mason bees, panergene bees, and fairy bees, for instance, and they have serious data gaps in their occurrence records. This accounts for the vast majority of bees in Utah, for which we lack the necessary information to determine a conservation status, which we need to develop conservation actions for the state. And then there are the underappreciated groups of pollinators that may have been overlooked because they lack the charisma and excellent PR department of monarchs and bumblebees. Wasps, flies, beetles, and moths are vital pollinators, as well as beneficial predators and food sources for other wildlife. And we have nearly no occurrence information for most of these insects. Even less popular and recognizable butterfly species suffer serious data gaps and could be declining before our eyes. In order to elevate the conservation needs of these at-risk pollinators, we need to have enough information to establish a state-level conservation status for each one. This year, we are excited to shift our Utah Pollinator Pursuit data collection to the iNaturalist community science platform, and we encourage our volunteers to pursue all the pollinators that they can. Rather than creating a list of target species, we're asking you to submit photographs of any and all pollinators you find. Getting started is easy. You can join iNaturalist on your browser or download the app to your iPhone or Android, create a free account, and search Utah Pollinator Pursuit in the project section to join. To submit an observation of any organism, you'll need to be logged into your account and then upload photos of what you saw and include details of when and where you saw it. Then you can suggest what type of organism you saw. Here's a short tutorial on how to use the iNaturalist app to make an observation.
Okay, so you've installed the iNaturalist app and created an account. Time to get outside and record your first observation. Here's how to do it. Any living thing, like a plant, animal, or fungus, can be an observation on iNaturalist. Once you find something you'd like to record, just tap Observe and take a photo. You can review your picture, then hit Next if it looks good. To identify it, hit What did you see? If you have an internet connection, iNaturalist will suggest 10 visually similar species and often a common ancestor. You can choose one of those or search for a species name. On this observation details screen, you can add more photos of the same organism or write a note. The date, time, and location have been automatically added. You can also change the geoprivacy of the observation, mark whether it's captive or cultivated, or add it to a project. Once you're finished, just hit Share, and your observation will be uploaded for everyone to see and identify. That's it. Keep on exploring and sharing.
Keep in mind that iNaturalist uses recognition software, location data, and the date of the observation to offer a suggested species identification, which can be verified or corrected by experts in the INAT community. Observations that are detailed, in focus images with the organism filling the frame have a better chance of providing species identifiable data. I recommend taking photos with your phone's standard camera app rather than using the camera function in iNaturalist because you can save and edit your photos more easily. If you're trying to get images of a really active insect, try taking a video first and then getting screenshots to upload. One great thing about iNaturalist is that you can submit up to 20 images of an organism, which could be really helpful for showing different angles and identifying features of an insect. Just remember to only submit photos for one organism per observation. For a lot of species, we don't have good data on their juvenile life stages. So if you encounter eggs, larvae, or pupae, that is just as valuable as observations of adults. I'd like to offer some tips for getting great insect observation photos. First and foremost, be patient and spend some time scanning an area as quietly as you can. Checking flowers is great, but also look on and under leaves, around rocks, and even the soil around the base of plants or pavement. Sometimes you hear the pollinator before you spot it, so listen for buzzing behavior. This sort of activity might look a bit silly to others, but I can speak from personal experience that the embarrassment is fleeting when I've found a cool bug. With insect photos, the closer the better. Try to get as close as you can without spooking your subject. My trick is to take photos of an insect while I slowly approach them, and if I'm lucky, I can get a pretty nice zoomed in image. And if not, maybe sometimes I have to crop. For those interested in macro and telephoto lenses or attachments, this can be a great way to get more detailed images of your subjects. When you zoom in and focus on your subject, try to get the insect's eyes in focus at least. For butterflies and moths, the colorful wing patterns are important distinguishing features to have in focus. Solitary bees can be difficult to identify between each other, but the veins of their wings often offer important details to experts, so those could be in focus. Crisp details of the body, the head, thorax, and abdomen also provide diagnostic information to identify bees, flies, beetles, and wasps. Insect photography takes practice, and even somewhat blurry images are still worth submitting. I always recommend taking multiple photos from different angles if possible. Regardless of whether you're using your phone or a DSLR to take a picture, be prepared to edit that photo to emphasize the identifying details of your subject. The image file gets compressed a little bit when uploaded to iNaturalist, so a small loss of detail is possible. Adjusting the brightness, contrast, shadows, color saturation, and sharpness might help clarify the image. Some talented photographers out there might cringe at the idea of cropping down a beautifully composed photo, but centering and enlarging your subject can go a long way to helping identify the insect. For example, these beautiful photos of interesting pollinators are very nice, but they are not ideal observations. Simply cropping the images down reveals a lot more detail about the insect, its behavior, and how it interacts with its habitat. I would even suggest submitting both the original and the cropped image in the observation to provide additional ecological context. My last tip is to just be patient and practice. Insects are successful animals in part because they are quick, and that makes them tricky photography subjects. Even if you get a blurry image that needs some editing or you find a dead insect, those photos can be really valuable data. Don't worry if your observation can't be identified to species. That's the inherent challenge of community science data for insects, because even collection specimens can be difficult to ID to species, and that's okay. You also don't have to be any sort of expert to attempt a guess at what organism you found. You can suggest a common name or the taxonomic level you recognize, and folks in the iNaturalist community can weigh in from there. Again, thank you so much for your willingness to support our native pollinators. This project has been such a success because our amazing volunteers and their generous contribution of time and effort. If you'd like more information, a refresher on our training materials, or other ways to get involved, You can check out our project website, our project page on Sageline Collaborative. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and you can keep an eye on our project journal on iNaturalist for fun updates. Thanks again, and happy pollinator pursuit.